And finally, we're going to talk about support techniques. Mind mapping, workshops, CRC cards, audio and video recording, use case modeling, and prototypes. Some of them we'll discuss in detail in this video. Others we will link in the additional and supplementary information that you will find in our MOOC. So first, something general about support techniques. They are called support techniques because they are supposed to be used in conjunction with previously presented elicitation techniques. They're also more general than the elicitation techniques that we talked before. They are not specifically related to just requirements elicitation. And it's also important to know that not every of those support techniques is suitable for every elicitation technique. So some of them can combine very well, some of them are more general and can be combined with almost all of them, but you have to keep an eye on this, that this really makes sense. They are supposed or should improve the efficiency, balance out weaknesses of certain elicitation techniques, or prevent pitfalls of a technique that you can forecast or foresee. Let's start with something super simple that is also very general and very much applicable in almost all scenarios: mind maps. They're a really nice graphical representation that you can use to show relationship in the dependencies between certain concepts, requirements, problems, ideas. So you can already see, like from the examples that I'm giving, they're very versatile. So helping to structure informations, how they are connected, and so that you don't lose track despite the fact that you might work with a lot of information. And we also talked about workshops previously, but in a rather short context, where we said, okay, this is among the most common and most popular elicitation techniques. It's also a supporting technique where you have a joint meetings of the requirement engineer and stakeholders, or a subset of the stakeholders. You use the meeting to elaborate on goals and also may go into detail depending on the purpose of the call. And there are like many use cases where it could make sense. You could use a workshop to design the user interface. You could use the workshop to start like specifics for certain parts, or going broader and more general, mapping out like the building blocks on a more abstract level first before then going into detail. How do you properly prepare a workshop? Once again, objective. No matter what you do, it's always about first defining the objective and the goal of what you want to achieve. If you don't have a plan of what you want to achieve, then there's probably no proper result out of the workshop or any other technique that you're using. Work results and procedures should be defined up front. So decide on the work results explicitly, define the procedures to gain and develop the work results, combine them to an agenda, no meeting without an agenda, and plan regular breaks. It doesn't make sense to have a 5-minute workshop, but also a 3-hour workshop without a break is probably not going to yield any proper results. The important part of the preparation for a workshop is to decide on who should participate. Choose the participant based on the work results. What do you want to achieve? Which people do you need to achieve that? Make sure your selection of participants is representative. Invite the participants early enough so that they don't have any scheduling problems, or that they don't have to scam us to put it like somewhere in their schedule while they do not really have enough time. And agree with the participants up on the work results. What's the point here? Like, why do we meet? Communicate with them. As I already said before, keep them in the loop, make them feel heard, make them feel involved, then they are way more motivated. If they are behind your agenda, great, then they will help you and work with you and not against you. Another important aspect is location. Where do you conduct the workshop? Online, yeah, sure, you could do that. On-site, probably easier, but then you have to make sure that there's a location where all the participants can join. Make sure that the location has enough room for the participants. Provide a proper atmosphere, coffee, cookies, enough fresh air, shouldn't be too cold, shouldn't be too warm, maybe some other nice things that make their stay more like pleasurable, and also keep them in a nice mood so that they are willing to work with you. Also make sure that you have the technical equipment that you need. Maybe you need a beamer, maybe you need a whiteboard, maybe you need other stuff. In best case, you're once again working in a 2-person team, 1 moderator and 1 person transcribing what's happening. Invite an external moderator and an external transcript writer if you can. Then you, as a requirements engineer, can really focus on your task of the elicitation of requirements. Then, moving on to conducting the workshop. It's very similar to the interviews. First, you made an introduction. Present the workshop objective and the work results. What do you want to achieve? Give the participants the opportunity to discuss them. Like, do they agree? Do they have additions? What are their thoughts? Make them feel heard. Explain the procedures. What are we going to do and why are we going to do it? Set the discussion rules explicitly so that everyone knows them and that you can also call out someone if they break the rules. Let the participants vote on the application of these rules one by one. You get a buy-in from them. If they previously agreed and voted for it, it's really hard for them to suddenly argue that they don't make sense, those rules, that they have a right to break them. So this is really important, a really good tip. And then the working part starts. Make sure that the participants adhere to the agenda and the discussion rules and that they stay on track. Protocol the results. Document and identify conflicts and try to solve them, best case right away, right at that point. And then also document decisions explicitly and trace how you got there. So X proposed this new requirement. It's a conflict with a previous requirement. We discussed it, came to that solution, and this is how we decided to solve the problem. And if you don't explicitly track this process, you might find yourself throughout the requirements engineering process again and again and again having the same discussion because no one ever properly documented it. So it's not written on paper that this has been discussed 20 times before. Once you're done with the main work part of the workshop, you are slowly but surely moving towards the phase where you're wrapping everything up. So be sure to gather all the remaining topics. Define further procedures for each of the remaining topics. So we identified this problem. What do we do with this problem now? Just as an example, make a plan. Allow your participants to give a feedback about the workshop. What went well? What did not went well? Give them the opportunity to have the last word. That makes them feel heard, involved, valued. Thank the participants for their attendance. And very important, of course, post-process it. Consolidate the work results, ask the participants for the approval of the transcript. Is there something that's not accurate, something missing? Would they like to extend something? Let each participant approve on the consolidated work results, get their buy-in. Something that can also be helpful either as part of workshops or in conjunction with other elicitation techniques are prototypes. Prototypes for illustrations are one thing, prototypes in general are also applicable. They are very well suited to illustrate requirements. Some requirements can be illustrated, others not. The feel and look of a website or a user interface for an app are good examples here. You can create mock-ups, you can give people something to play with that is easy to create with low effort but yields potentially valuable requirements for you to elicit. It also allows for clarification of vague requirements. Yeah, there should be a button to log in. Okay, now I put a button to log in, but then the user says, or the stakeholder, yeah, okay, this is at an uncomfortable position, or I need 15 steps to get to that button. So this makes this vague requirement that there should be somewhere a login button more specific. Consequences of new or changed requirements can be identified. So now you move the button somewhere else. What is the consequence? Does it now work better? Does it interfere with a previous requirement that now cannot be fulfilled properly anymore or is inconvenient? You can get those consequences very easily. Mostly used for user interface prototypes, but it could also be something else. But this is the main domain where you're going to use prototypes. Prototypes can be very different. Paper prototypes are quite common. For example, for graphical user interfaces, you print out a user interface and the user then clicks on this on paper. You go to another paper page. You could also have a so-called Wizard of Oz prototype where you develop a graphical user interface, but input will be sent directly to an operator who's simulating the system behavior. and who produces the appropriate output. So essentially something like a theater game. Of course, you could also use software prototypes, but you have to make sure that they do not take too much time when you're already going into like coding software. You can use some like simple stuff like Visual Basic. And very important, make sure that this remains a throwaway prototype. Don't ever think about building the actual product on top of a throwaway prototype. They are supposed to be thrown away. They are not the foundation of the actual project later on. This is very, very important. The final support technique that we're going to cover in this video are so-called focus groups, which are a special form of workshops. Usually you conduct them with 6 to 10 participants, and you start with a problem, like map a collection of problems or flip chart. You collect the reasons for the problems, and then you focus on optimal solutions for the problem. And now we're at the end of the first step of the requirements engineering process. This is the end of our elicitation lecture. So what are the key takeaways that you should remember? First, elicitation is a core activity of requirements engineering. Without good elicitations, requirements will be wrong or missing. If you mess up this step, if you cut it short, if you don't do it properly, if something is missing, then you will have big problems later on. Stakeholders, document and existing systems as requirement sources are super valuable to you. Missing a source leads to missing requirements of the source, or you have to somehow get another way to get those requirements that is potentially way more difficult than just not missing this initial source. We also introduced to you many techniques for requirements elicitation, mostly because there is not a single technique that can cover everything. Each and every technique has their advantages and disadvantages. You can combine them in different ways to get a complete list of requirements, also minimizing the risk of missing requirements or getting bad or incomplete requirements. From those techniques that we presented you, we get a lot of good requirements. Of course, this list is not complete. There are so many more approaches on how to do this, but those are among the most common and also, in our opinion, the most useful. So keep them in mind while working on your projects, but adapt according to your own context and your own needs for your project. Not every technique is good in every scenario. Select the techniques depending on your project, and usually you have to combine multiple techniques to get proper results.